Welcome to Father Ted Talks, where we learn together and rediscover the heritage of the Armenian people. Today we are going to go on a journey into the majestic world of the Armenian Manuscripts. We are also going to learn about a tragic story of one of the well-known Armenian manuscripts. When we speak of Armenian heritage and culture, manuscripts are definitely up high on that list. Along with khachkars, crowstones, manuscripts are unique symbols of Armenian identity, cultural and religious heritage. Each manuscript has a story to tell. Stories of creation and illustrators. Stories of nobles and royal families as sponsors of manuscripts. Stories of preservation and survival. The invention of Armenian alphabet gives birth to Armenian manuscripts. The year was 405 AD. An Armenian monk by the name Mesrop Mashtots realizes the need for Armenian letters, mostly for religious use and specifically for the translation of the Bible. He initiates a historic undertaking of creating an Armenian alphabet. The Catholicos of the time, Saint Zahag Bartev, supports Mesrop and his efforts. Pretty soon, Mesrop translates the first sentence into Armenian. Interestingly enough, he chooses the book of Proverbs, chapter 1, verse 2, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight. With the creation of Armenian alphabet, an unprecedented movement begins for Armenian literature. Important books are written, number of fundamental philosophical and religious works are translated into Armenian. That is why the 5th century in Armenian culture is known as Golden Age. In the years and decades following the creation of Armenian alphabet, Mesrop and Zahag opened many schools in various regions of Armenia and recruited many students. They started the legacy of creating the Armenian manuscripts. Most of the manuscripts are religious, liturgical services, gospels, and Bibles. But some are wonderful works or translations of literature, philosophical, or even of medical healing books. They are created mostly by monks, usually for liturgical and religious use in monasteries or churches. Amazingly, most of Armenian manuscripts have clear records about the monks and illustrators of the manuscripts, as well as the date of creation. It was common for royal and noble families to sponsor a manuscript and donate it to a monastery or keep it for their private use. To be fair, the royals and nobles were the only ones who could afford to sponsor such an expensive project. As you may know, manuscripts were written not on a paper but on parchment, which is produced from animal skin, mostly sheep, goat, or calf. Depending on the size of a manuscript, sometimes one page of a manuscript would require a skin of one animal. You can imagine the resources required and the magnitude of creating a Bible. Very often, a decent amount of gold was used in making a manuscript. It was not as common, but in some cases, the royal family or a noble family ordering the gospel was depicted in the manuscript itself. For instance, the family gospel of Cilician King Levon has the icon of himself and his entire family in the manuscript. Like any other art form, manuscript illustration also had different stages of development. Especially, the shapes and forms of letters changed from one period to another. The earliest form was called Yergatagir, which literally means iron writing or letters. Perhaps the name itself suggests the simplicity of this form and shape of letters. The letters are straight and direct like iron. Manuscripts are not as colorful, and lacking any form of other supporting illustrations. Another important development and form was called poloragir, especially used in 10th, 11th centuries. The origin of the name is not clear. This form was special since for the first time capital letters and some punctuation marks are used. Later, with the invention of printing in the 16th century, this shape of letters was chosen as the most appropriate for printing. The more common form was called zartagir or trshnagir, which literally means bird letters. Most of the manuscripts are made with this shape. It is rich in colors, shapes, details, and illustrations. Capital letters are illustrated in the form of birds. Special red color is invented called vortan garmish. This color never loses its shine and brightness over time. This special bright red color was made with insects from Arad Valley, and that's where the name comes from, vortan, meaning insect. The secret formula of this red color is yet to be fully discovered. The earliest known Armenian manuscript is Queen Milkha's Gospel, dated 862 AD. Milkha was the first queen of Armenian kingdom of Vaspuragan. She was from the Bagratuni dynasty. When she got married to King Gagig of Vaspuragan, the Gospel came with her as a wedding dowry. The Gospel served as the official and private Gospel of the royal family for many years. Later, the queen donates the Gospel to the monastery of Varak. Thankfully, in 1830, before the Armenian genocide and destruction of churches, it was found and transferred to the island of St. Lazar. The manuscript is currently located at the Armenian Manuscripts Monastery of St. Lazar in Venice. One of the well-known masters of manuscript illustration was Taurus Roslin. He lived in the 13th century. We don't know much about his life, and it is not uncommon since illustrators consider themselves as servants and not worthy of any praise. But he played a significant role as an illustrator and master. He further developed the Armenian manuscript illustration by introducing a wide range of narratives in his iconography, based on his knowledge of Western European art. His style is unique, special, and delicate choice of colors. Very often, human figures appear in full size, and more importantly, expressing human emotions. Some of his icon illustrations take a full page of a manuscript. A great number of Armenian manuscripts are illustrated by an Armenian priest named Sarkis Pitsak. He lived in Cilician Armenia in the 14th century. King Levon IV was the main sponsor of his manuscripts. Interestingly enough, Sarkis was not a monk, but a married priest. He produced the greatest number of known manuscripts today. Nearly 50 manuscripts are attributed to him. Being a married priest myself, I'm not sure how he found the time to accomplish such a great work. His manuscripts are beautiful, intricate, detailed, and colorful. Amazing iconography. Today, worldwide, we have about 30,000 Armenian manuscripts. Of course, a large number of them were lost or destroyed during and even before the Armenian genocide. By some accounts, only 35% of Armenian manuscripts survived. However, it is hard to know the exact number since there was never any account of the total number of Armenian manuscripts produced. About 70% of all Armenian manuscripts are here at the Matenadaran, the largest manuscript repository and Museum of Armenian Manuscripts. The official title of this center is Mesrop Mashtot's Institute of Ancient Manuscripts. It was built right after World War II to preserve the large collection of confiscated Armenian manuscripts. They were kept at a city library without any proper conditions for preservation. Besides being a museum, more importantly, it is a research center and institute where they study, translate, and restore ancient manuscripts. But where do this large collection of confiscated manuscripts come from? Well, before this Mate Nadaran, there was one earlier at Holy Echmiadzin. As the spiritual center of the Armenian Church, naturally, many manuscripts were kept here, and this building was built as a designated museum for all the manuscripts. After the Armenian genocide, as the survivors found shelter at Holy Echmiadzin, many of them brought manuscripts with them from their cities, churches, and monasteries, trying to save these treasures from destruction. Later, Soviet authorities decided to confiscate the entire collection from Holy Echmiadzin, claiming that these national treasures belong to the people and need to be preserved in special conditions. However, they themselves were not able to provide these special conditions at the time either, and all these treasures were kept at a city library for many years, until thankfully the Mate Nadaran was built. The second largest collection of Armenian manuscripts is in Jerusalem, about 4,000 of them. The manuscripts are kept at St. Taurus Armenian Church. But unlike the manuscripts in Armenia at the Mate Nadaran Institute, this collection hasn't been studied extensively, and the conditions at St. Taurus are not ideal for manuscript preservation. Around 6,000 Armenian manuscripts are preserved by the Armenian Catholic Mkhitarist Brotherhood between Venice and Vienna. Their collection is special, in a way that the monks who take or bring the manuscripts, they were well preserved in condition. The Armenian monks in St. Lazar, most notably Revondalishan and others, dedicated their lives in studying these manuscripts. I'm sure by now many of you are wondering, then what about the accessibility of these manuscripts today? And following that, with the development of modern digital technology, the possibility of digitizing these manuscripts. Well, I'm really proud to say that here in Minnesota, we have a world-leading institution that is pioneering global efforts to digitize not only Armenian manuscripts, but the heritage of other nations. The institution is called Hill Museum and Manuscript Library at St. John University in Collegeville, Minnesota. They have thousands of digitized manuscripts from different parts of the world. The efforts to digitize the manuscripts in Armenia are also underway by the Mate Nadaran Institute. This provides not only accessibility to all these treasures for the purposes of research, but also of digital preservation and security for the future. Of course, manuscripts vary in size, shape, and form. This one is the smallest manuscript. It is a calendar of feasts and holidays. It weighs only 19 grams and has 104 pages. It was made in 1434 AD in Kaffa. You may ask, where is Kaffa? You're most likely familiar with another name for this city, Theodosia, in Crimea. It was an important center for Armenian culture and community. The largest Armenian manuscript is a book of sermons, known as Selection of Speeches and Sermons of Monastery of Mush, although it was not made at the Monastery of Mush, but Avak Monastery in 13th century. It weighs about 28 kilograms, has 601 pages, but originally it had 660 pages. The journey and story of this manuscript is tragic and heartbreaking. Over time, it was torn apart into two pieces. Most of the manuscript today is at Matenadaran. The last 2 pages were found in Moscow. Another 17 pages are in Venice. The manuscript was sponsored by somebody named Asfazatur. He was the mayor of a town of Bambert. Unfortunately, he didn't really get to enjoy the manuscript. By the time it was ready, the Mongols invade Armenia. Asfazatur is killed during the invasion, and manuscript was stolen and disappeared. For many years, nobody knows the whereabouts of the manuscript. Time goes by, Mongols are gone too, but the manuscript is nowhere to be found. People didn't forget about this amazing manuscript, however. Many years later, a Turkish judge comes forward and says that he has the manuscript. Naturally, Asfazatur's family and the people asked for it to be given back. But the judge claims, which I'm sure was a lie, that Asfazatur owed him some money, and he took the manuscript as a payback. They negotiated with the judge for about a year. He is asking an excessive amount, 4,000 silver coins, as a payment to give the manuscript back to Armenians. The monks at the monastery of Mush begin raising funds and money to buy back this manuscript. This was a huge amount of money and not easy to come up with. But people come together and raise the necessary funds to pay the corrupt judge. The names of all the donors were added later to the manuscript. The manuscript finds a new home at the monastery of Mush, and that's where the name comes from. It stays at this monastery for the next 800 years. But the story of this manuscript is not over yet. The year is 1915. The manuscript disappears again. During the Armenian genocide, while people are trying to escape and survive carrying whatever belongings they have, 2 women leave everything behind, and instead of taking any of their own belongings, they take the manuscript. They tear it into 2 pieces because it was too large and too heavy to carry. One piece of the manuscript was found later by Russian soldiers, buried under the monastery of Yerzhenka. They take it to the Armenian church in Tbilisi. The second part of the manuscript arrives at Holy Echmiadzin. Many of the survivors come to Holy Echmiadzin seeking shelter and help. One night, when everybody was sleeping at a monastery, in the middle of the night there is a knock on the door of one of the monks. Half asleep, he wakes up, opens the door, and there are 2 women at the door, visibly tired and exhausted. They give him the second part of the manuscript and leave without saying much. The monk didn't even get their names. While the manuscript was saved by these women, it is heartbreaking that we don't even know who they are, their names, and yet they sacrificed everything and even risked their own lives to save this treasure. To honor their amazing sacrifice, a few years ago a monument was placed in Yerevan dedicated to these women. It is called Lives of Eternity. Armenian manuscripts are fascinating treasures of Armenian culture, church, and literature. A world heritage unlike any other, with colorful and bright illustrations, and even more amazing stories to tell. Thank you for watching Father Ted Talks. Subscribe, like, and share on our YouTube channel and Facebook page. See you next time.